All right. Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Um, let's prep some ES for the day. Before I do want to go into ES, I do want to take just like 1 or 2 minutes to look at how markets ended up playing out yesterday. Because we did mark a level to the downside and talked about a level to the top side. We never actually even got close to our downside level because we did have that really big gap up yesterday. However, we did have this level up from 68.90 all the way basically to 68.98 as a resistive zone that we did talk about with open states up there forming at the start of this ETH opening candle. During our trading yesterday within Ascend, we actually did attempt to take a short at 68.93. We ended up moving up to about 68.95, so we had a little bit of drawdown with our first trim at 68.88. Um, we ended up actually cutting this trade break even after we had this move down to 68.90 and had no real attempt at breaking below this resistive area. So we ended up did taking this end up going break even on this trade, which ended up being a pretty good decision because even though we would have hit our take profit one, we would have came up here and totally broke through our stop loss. So we probably would have ended up break even anyway. So this zone ended up providing a little bit of resistance, but the fact that we ended up having a lot of float on our bid, a lot of really strong buyers yesterday, trading at around 130 and 140% on the DOM, this ended up actually being a pretty good decision to end up cutting this one break even. So we had one break even trade, and that was all we ended up doing yesterday. It was a pretty boring day on ES. All right. So today's a new day. Let's go look at how our yellow box is performing and find some high probability zone on our fractals charts. So looking at this right off the bat, there's a few things I'm noting here that I want to talk about. And this is one of the big reasons I really do like trading our RTH session is because now I have several hours of Asia session and Euro session to look at to understand how price is actually moving. And so the first thing I want to look at here is that we broke below our yellow box on the 15-minute chart. What this means is there's a little bit of bearish intention in the market today. With that break below our average range and a hold below average range, if we were looking at our yellow box strategy very, very simply, by just looking at the fact that if you break below yellow box, you do have pretty decent chance of tapping this bottom of average range support. Now, we do track yellow box performance and we've historically tracked it pretty closely with an ascend, and we end up getting a win rate on yellow box somewhere between 73 and 64% month over month. So that win rate isn't perfect. It's not really great in my opinion, and that's not really a win rate that I look for um, when I'm trading, especially with basically a one-to-one win rate. So if you break below yellow box, ideally you would take an entry at the retest of the bottom with the hope of moving down to the bottom of average range, and then your stop would actually be a break above yellow box on a 15-minute. And so this gives you about a one-to-one win rate. So while I don't trade this strategy, this is a way to look at bullish or bearish intention on the day. So the fact that we've broken below yellow box, I see this a little bit as bearish intention on the day. But then the other thing I do want to look at is we had a little bit of respect of our secondary pivot area. This is a pretty large block of buying and selling activity that has happened historically. And Mr. Milk, Milk's yellow box chart, he owns this and he marks out a couple of these levels for us. He's one of the creators of fractals as well. These pivot areas are kind of decision points for us to say if we're holding below these pivots, this is a little bit of confirmation for short because sellers ended up being in control at these points of inflection. And then if we end up getting above, we see buyers getting control. So what I'm seeing right now is the fact that we tried to respect this secondary pivot by staying short. At around 6 a.m. this morning, we had a pretty strong push up to want to actually get above pivot. We broke above pivot and are tending to see pivot as support right now. So I'm getting a little bit of a mixed message at the market. Part of me is saying we have a bearish intention, excuse me, because we broke the lower yellow box. And now the fact that we're above all of our pivots is telling me that we do have a little bit of bullish intention on the day. The other thing that I do want to note is our depth of market down here in the corner. We're trading at 128.8%, which is telling me that there's about 30% more buyers actively participating on the tape than there are sellers right now. So buyers once again appear to be in control this morning. Yesterday, we talked about the DOM. Our buyers were really strong during pre-market, and they ended up being very strong all during um, our US trading session, New York session. And that was one of the reasons we were really, really risk averse when it came to shorting in that 93 area yesterday. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye on our DOM this morning and throughout our trading session to make sure that if we do end up taking any rejects, we have a lot of additional confluences to support sellers, basically starting to step in those situations. Right. So bearish intention because yellow box, a little bit of bullish intention because we're above pivot. Let's go look at fractals and see if we have any clarity there. Oops, we pulled over for us. Okay, here's our fractal charts. Okay, so let's go look at ES. And as always, we're going to look at our largest time frames and slowly move to our smallest time frames to see if we can find high density areas. So for those of you who haven't seen fractals charts, we don't actually look at our charts in a linear form. This is a little bit of what we would consider a bird's eye view of price action and where we see supportive and resistive zones on any linear chart. And so what we have here are long waves and short waves indicating bullish momentum and bearish momentum in our markets. One of the things that we actually did talk about yesterday morning is that our probability to basically have 4 bullish days in a row is very, very low on ES. So if we go look at our options action here, you'll notice here that we're at 4%. We have a pretty low probability of continuing with more and more bullish days. And so that's also supporting a bearish thesis for the morning that the odds of continuing bullish day after day after day are getting lower and lower. You'll kind of notice whenever we have like H1s or H2s, like those probabilities are pretty high in terms of going like 1 or 2 days of bullish or 1 or 2 days bearish. Because we're on that fourth bullish day, we actually don't have that high of a probability of continuing to the upside. On the wave one daily, each of these candles is showing a daily candle and how price has moved within there. One of the things that we don't actually see all that often is our wave one daily, this, what I would honestly consider overextended. One of the reasons we were looking at that 90 area yesterday is because we did have an open state at 90 on this last candle, and we were above our 20% odds, which basically means we have a 20% odd. There's a 20% chance that we would continue higher past this zone, which basically means there's an 80% chance of price rejecting back down. So whenever I see these 20% odds areas on a chart as large as the wave one daily, I tend to look at that to say, wow, this is a pretty decent area paired with an open state to attempt a short. And that's why we tried that 6,900 level yesterday. So as you can see then, we ended up actually breaking above that 20% odds. We're seeing a lot of blank space. We don't have a lot of clusters here to the left side of our chart, which means there's actually a pretty decent chance for additional float to the upside. We have very tiny amounts of clusters here, kind of around, what price is this? 69.25, 69.35. We could actually see some pretty decent movements to the upside. Right now, we're trading at around 69.17, and you can see here our vector, which we look at all of our vector clusters as very supportive or resistive zones that help us indicate trend. 69.16, 75 is something we'll look at for a potential supportive area on our charts. I don't really see anything super clear on the wave one daily beyond the fact that we are relatively overextended and past our 20% odds and have a relatively low probability for making an H5 today. Okay, so let's move down to an hourly chart. So we'll look at our 7 wave 60 chart. This is a little bit of a smaller time frame. And you'll actually notice because it's a smaller time frame, we ended up getting a revision from yesterday's price action. So yesterday we ended up being actually very overextended on the 7 wave 60, but because we're looking at less history compared to the wave one daily, we did get a revision down to help us support a little bit of volatility. So right now that vector is trading at 69.1040, and I see that we have an open state at 69.1828. So let me go back to my linear chart and look at what's going on here. 69.18. Okay. So we have an open state formed from this high of day candle essentially this high day candle. So there's a little bit of resistance here. I'm probably not going to pay too much mind to that. We're also going to be noting that our vector is at 69.10. So we have a little bit of room down until we get supportive on the 7-wave 60, and then we do have that open state currently at high of day. I don't really see anything too good on the 7-wave 60 though, simply because we're really actually low on the chart. We're really close to pivot. We're pretty close to vector. We haven't even hit our 50% odds of continuation. So in my opinion, this isn't like a super overextended chart that gives me like a huge amount of confidence to want to go long or short. So we'll keep looking to see if we can find any high probability areas of rejection here. Okay, so let's go look at the 20-wave 15. And again, you can kind of see these long waves and these short waves. You'll see once again that we do have that 69.18 open state. That's from those high of day candles. But otherwise, a 20-wave 15-minute, we're actually looking pretty similar as a 7-wave 60. So again, seeing support at 69.10. This could be a potential area to look for a bounce. I probably won't be shorting at the 69.18 since we just tap that basically high of day from ETH as well. On the 10-wave 15-minute, again, we're seeing the 69.18 open state, 69.12.5 is where our vector is. So now we can actually start creating a vector cluster. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. So our vectors that we saw in our past charts were all the way from 69.10 to 69.12.60. I'm going to ignore the 69.18 open state, or sorry, vector that we ended up seeing on some of our large time frames, just because I don't want that zone to be very big. So I'm going to go from 12.50 to probably 10. So let's go mark that out on our charts right now, just so we have it. The one thing I will say is that Vector is one of those really great tools that is constantly moving and gives us like really good, what I would consider market generated information. And so as our day matures, about every 15 minutes, I do end up looking at Vector to see if we have any revisions of it moving up or moving down to indicate a trend. And you can actually see that in the charts. So let me try to zoom in this in so we can see it a little bit better. So that purple line is vector, and that's what we're looking at here. And you can notice that right now it's at 1263. Before it was at 10, 69.10, and I'm looking at this little blue number on the right-hand side of my screen. So it's at 69.10, 69.8, 69.7, 69.5, 69.1. So we actually are seeing a little bit of a bullish trend on vector on the 10-wave 15-minute. And so what I look for when I see a bullish trend like this is if we move back down to that vector area, that could be a potential area for us to bounce for continuation long. Okay. So that's what our vector is looking at. Let's look at a couple of smaller time frames as well. So the 7-wave 5-minute, we have a little bit more opportunity. Whoa there, let me zoom this back in. We have a little bit more opportunity here. So again, this vector is trading up at 69.15.38. So that's a little bit higher than what we've initially marked. So see, that zone is pretty big. That's actually indicating a pretty decent trend on the bullish side of the house just because that cluster is so large. And again, this is kind of personal preference. You guys can mark your vector zones however large you want, but for me, my personal risk tolerance is really no more than 5 or 6 points of risk, or to be totally honest, about $200 of risk. So yesterday our zone was really big. I think I ended up putting out like a 7 point stop loss. So my position size was actually pretty small. So anyway, with this, I could technically make my vector zone from 69.10 to 69.15.5, and anywhere kind of bouncing in that zone would be valid. The zone is just a little bit bigger. So vector cluster is personal preference. I try to keep my zones a little bit smaller and where the highest density of vectors are. Okay, so based on that though, we can actually see that we still have that 69.18 open state from all of those hive days that we made this morning. Um, One of the things I am looking at though is we have another open state up here. It's 69.26.5. And this is actually also in partnership with our 5% odds on the 7-wave 5-minute. So I'm going to just keep this in the back of my mind while we go look at the 50-wave 1-minute as a potential opportunity to short bit this area. The one reason I don't like this area right off the bat is simply because this is the only time we've seen this 69.26.5 on any of our charts. And the 7-wave 5-minute is a pretty small time frame. you can kind of see the range in general, right? Like our 2% odds is up at 69.26. And for example, if we go to our wave one daily, our 5% odds is up at 7,400. So you can kind of see that the 7 wave 5 minute is looking at a really tiny time frame and looking at implied volatility from a relatively short amount of time. And so that's good because you can kind of see some smaller areas for potential rejection opportunities. But if we are tending to have like a really strong trend or a lot of volume going into the market, these might not be amazing areas to look at just based off of the one time frame because just because we're here on the 7 wave, there might be a lot more room to the upside on the wave one, for example. So that's why we look at all the bigger time frames as well. The other reason why this 69.26 area does give me pause is because you'll notice here we have all these little clusters, these little black clusters. These are all looking at resistive and supportive areas on our charts. We have a huge amount of what we call blank space to the top side here, all the way up to even this very next cluster, which is like freaking 69.50 more or less on this chart. And so we do have potentially a resistive area at 69.26, but if we do break above this, we could see some opportunity for floating of price all the way up to 69.50 based on this chart. So we'll keep it in the back of our minds, but we might not mark it quite yet. 69.26 and a half. So let's go look at our really small time frame, the 50 wave 1 minute. Okay. So this guy, even smaller, right? See, we're even all the way up at our 2% odds, are trading at 69.33. Right now, Vector's at 69.14, basically 69.15. We're seeing again pretty bullish trend on our Vector, which looks really good. And again, from the 5% odds at the 69.18 all the way up to 69.33, we have a decent amount of blank space. See, we don't have any of these resistive clusters that we have marked. So technically, 69.26 to 69.33 would be a resistive area that we could look at to short. So let's go back to our linear chart to see if there's any other confluences between 26 and 33. Okay. So here's our 26 to 33 area. This is actually a pretty decent zone here for two reasons. So the 26 zone is where we start. This is kind of like not anything super obvious. We do have our ceiling marked here starting at 69.26 from our overnight session. The one thing I'll say about our overnight ceiling is once New York session opens, we tend to have a pretty big boost of volatility. And so I love waiting 15 minutes into market open for all of that new options data to update so we can get an updated ceiling. So, yes, overnight ceiling is indicating decreased volatility, but as we get into New York session, I'm not going to pay attention to this particular point on the chart because our ceiling is probably going to revise further up. What I do like though is at 32, particularly 32.75, we see the start of our implied volatility walls as well as the top of our average range resistance. So if we zoom out of this chart just a little bit, we can see that our implied volatility is actually relatively low today. 68.80 is kind of the bottom zone of our implied volatility, and 69.32 is where the top zone is. So we actually have pretty low potential for large moves today. And our implied volatility walls essentially are just showing us where market makers want to keep price within. If they can keep price within a range, they can tend to, farm premiums and basically make money on all of their open positions. When we start getting outside of the IV walls, that's when market makers start losing money, and they're going to basically do everything they can in their power to keep price action in these IV walls from the top side and the bottom side. And so I actually do kind of like this zone, probably anywhere between 32.25 to 32.75 because we have these additional confluences of the bottom of our IV wall as well as the top of our average range. And then we can go back into our fractals chart. So that's 32.25 to 33. And you can see that we have this open state at 69.33 and our 2% odds on our 50 wave 1 minute. And then our 7 wave 5 minute, we have opportunity at 26. So 26 is pretty low. I'm probably not just going to like blindly enter this at 26 because 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, there's like 7 points of drawdown to even get to this 33 area. So my high probability setup zone today would probably be around 32.25 to 33. And then we would have a stop probably above like 35 or 37. And that's mostly just to give us breathing room, right? If we obviously end up repairing this open state on our 50 wave 1 minute, if we end up repairing this open state at 33.20, right? 33.19, 33.25, and we start breaking above it and holding above it, that is ideally when I would see this get invalidated. But depending on when we reach this area, we might want to be a little bit patient with our entry to see if we kind of shoot over that level, or you know, maybe we'll hit it and just immediately reject. But I do want to give us a little bit of breathing room. So what I'm going to do is mark 69.33.20 as an open state. I'm actually just going to copy this and drag this over. So we'll do 33.50. And then I am going to take the zone all the way down to 26 just because we did have that open state there. But what I'm going to do is actually just mark a line to show like where I actually want to enter this. And I think I'm going to probably enter this trade here. And again, guys, this is all depending on how strong our depth of market is. So right now we are seeing strength, but again, we still have this bullish or this bearish intention form overnight. So if we can make it up to this zone and get a really clean rejection back down, um, we have some good opportunity here because we would probably look at trims at a break back below the zone of 26. We would definitely trim at 20 at the top of our yellow box and then probably be most out of this at 16. So this will give us about 15 points of profit, which is pretty good, especially considering we don't have that much implied volatility for today. Um, Wakey, I see that you have a question here about what do I use to convert SPY to ES? I honestly just use like whatever calculator is on Google. We're working in Ascend to build a bot that we can just like quickly put either ESs or SPYs or, for example, NQ or QQQ, to just put one of those prices in and it'll automatically convert it for you straight within our Discord. But right now, a lot of us are just using Google. Um, but to that point, obviously, you can look at SPY and QQQ and fractals as well. I just don't really trade options. So you could also just compare SPY and QQQ levels as well to ES and NQ. Okay, so let me go mark my little, let me go get the text here. Okay, so this is our open state on the 50 wave movement. Okay, cool. Doesn't look too terrible. Um, y- uh, there was a question here about what do I mean when I say strength of the DOM? So looking back down here, so this is my price ladder. Let me try to make this a little bigger. I feel like it's cut off a little bit on the screen. So this is my price ladder that I look at whenever I'm trading, and this is literally just showing where price currently is at and what our active buyers are looking like at every price point and what our active sellers are looking like at every price point. And I also do have this embedded on just the right side of my screen as well. This is just a visual of the price ladder. But when I say the depth of market, and strength and weakness, I'm particularly looking at this number at the bottom here. And there's a couple numbers at the bottom of my DOM. So there's this 12,500, there's this 10,000, and then there's this like 2,600 number, and then there's 125%. So this is showing the 12,500 is showing cumulative active buyers, and the 10,500 is showing our cumulative sellers. And so the 126% is simply just like the delta or the percent change between our buyers and our sellers. So anything like greater than 100% is indicating stronger buyers, and anything less than 100% is indicating stronger sellers. And so yesterday, that was why we were so weary about the shorts when we did take our shorts at 93 because our DOM was actually trading at 146%. It was like very, very strong. And so we knew we were trying to move in front of a moving train, but we were being really patient with our entry. Like I said, we ended up getting out of that trade break even because the DOM was not giving up. But I'm going to be looking at my DOM quite a bit as we get into this zone. And if we don't see any deterioration of buyers, that would be another indicator for us to kind of let this trade. So. Mhm. Honestly, I'm not sure what CVD is. I don't know what that stands for, but mm. Yeah, and so Nika, George, I know George answered this for you about like for fractals. So you can get fractals through Ascend. We have fractals. One of the things that we're actually trying to do too. So fractals is $259 a month, which I know seems pretty expensive. I always like to joke that it's 5 points on ES a month, and we can usually trade to get ourselves 15 to 17 points on ES a day. But it's 259 a month. But one of the things that we're doing in Ascend is if you guys do join our premium, which is $75 a month, we do get you guys on a free trial for 30 days. And really, the goal with that is just to make sure that you guys have a chance to actually learn how to use the system. Because I completely understand that, like, when you look at this right off the bat, you're like, what is this? What are the capabilities in here? How do I even use this effectively? So, we want to give you guys like at least a month of being able to be in the system for free to just get comfortable with it and understand if it's a strategy you like. But so this Fractals, this whole software is developed by a gentleman named Russell, and he's been developing this software for over 20 years. And so he's been really, really working at this thing. But we ended up migrating the whole software to a more like live managed server because we used to have it on just like a offline server, and the poor thing ended up breaking because too many people started using it. So it moved to a more managed server. So we are running it for 259 a month. Um, so right now it's kind of crazy. Our wait list is actually pretty big. The wait list is running between 3 weeks to 4 weeks to get on because we only have, I believe, 25 or 30 open trials, and all of our trials are full right now. And so as every trial expires, like at the end of the month, we do bring on obviously the next person to get on the trial. And then, of course, um, after that 1 month trial, you'll be taken off of it. And then you can decide if you want to pay the 259 a month to have obviously full access to it forevermore. But in Ascend 2, we do try to build yellow box charts for members. And then, of course, we do live trade every morning as well, just and share our charts and stream and share fractals charts as well, just to get people more comfortable with the system. But really, our goal in, you know, teaching people and trading with people is like, yes, we definitely recognize that a lot of discords and a lot of reasons people join discords is for like call outs and having signals channels. We do have that, but really our mission and our goal is to build a network of professional traders so we can have Ascend as an area for professionals to come together and have a very safe, respectable place to talk charts, share ideas with entries and exits across various equities, and really just have like a good professional environment filled with people who want to make trading a career. And so we've seen actually a lot of really great growth. There's actually a couple folks on the live this morning who have demonstrated very, very professional growth in their trading. So that's kind of our goal with Ascend and why we want to really make sure that we can hold people's hands when they're starting fractals so they can honestly become users that are even stronger than us as admins at the end of the day. So we mapped out a rejection area here. One of the reasons I haven't really mapped out a bounce area is because in our fractals charts, pretty much all of our charts are above our pivot, which is indicating us creating a long wave or a bullish wave. If we do ever get back below pivot on all of our charts, I will look for a high probability bounce area. But right now, what I'm seeing as supportive and what I'm going to track as supportive is where our vector cluster is currently located. So as we go into New York session, I will continually watch our vector cluster just to understand where it's located and find that for a supportive area on our chart. So, for example, if we do reject that zone that I found, what I would call like our hot girl trim would probably be down at that vector cluster. And then any break below our vector cluster, I would probably start looking for a retest, a vector for continuation down, and then eventually allow all of our fractals charts to get into a bearish wave or get below that pivot zone to try to find a high probability bounce. So right now, based on our charts, we kind of have this 32 area as my high probability area for a short, but we'll keep tracking the DOM, and we'll keep tracking the location of our vectors, and we'll see how we do. But otherwise, guys, I'm gonna go make some breakfast and get some coffee and get ready for trading with the team here for New York Session Open in 30 minutes. But as always, guys, thanks for joining, and we will talk to you tomorrow morning. Let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments, and I'll chat with y'all. See you guys.